folks, and welcome to another edition of The Convergence Zone. I'm your host, Mark Selland, and today we have a very special guest. We have comes all the way from Texas, and his name is Gaylon Ross. And Gaylon, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
And it's great to have you. And I'm going to try to shut up most of this show because you've got a lot to tell us. Gaylon has interviewed some of the key involved people into LBJ's life. And am I saying this right?
Well, there were three key people that were involved in direct witnesses to the killing the next day and the night before at secret meeting.
Okay. And so let's just go into that. So who are these the people that you know, that you've actually talked to? Who are these people?
Okay, probably the one that knows the most about it was a fellow named Billy Saul Estes,
Okay.
who was my friend for about 18 years.
Okay.
He passed away this past May. And in 1994, he did a video for me. He agreed to do the video about the night before Kennedy was killed.
Okay.
And also about the details of the killing the next day. And after we finished it, he said, I just ask one thing, that you not make this public until I give you written permission to do so,
Okay.
or until I'm no longer here.
Give me some background on Billy Saul Estes.
Saul Estes was a wheeler digger from Pecos, Texas. And at one time he was worth about $1 billion.
Okay.
And he was named one of the 10 most promising young men by, I believe it was Time magazine, and in that day. And he, as a result, he was invited to the White House and met with Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Okay.
And he asked President Roosevelt how could he get involved in the business world. And so Roosevelt told him, he says, when you get home, contact me anytime you want to. Gave him the phone number and says, if I can help you, give me a call. Mm-hmm. So Billy arranged to buy 17 carloads of surplus grain. And so the Department of Agriculture fellow showed up at his house. Okay. And said, I'm here to get Mr. Estes to sign a contract. And his mother says, well, you'll have to wait a little bit. He's still in high school. He'll be here any minute. And so about that time he walked up, and so the fellow says, but you're just a kid. He says, well, I bought 17 carloads of grain and I want them. President Roosevelt said I could have them.
Okay.
And so he had to let him have it, and that was his first venture. And as I say, he was still in high school at the time, but he went into all forms of agriculture in West Texas, and later on in life, he was convicted of mail fraud. Mm-hmm. The real charge was that he mortgaged non-existent fertilizer tanks.
Right.
And but all the people involved in the fertilizer tank issue knew that eventually they were going to have the tanks built, and that he would eventually pay it. Uh-huh. And all the parties to it thought there was nothing wrong, but Bobby Kennedy wanted to try to get something on Johnson, and he thought it could get to him by going through Billy Saul Estes.
Okay.
And so that's how he was charged.
How does Billy Saul Estes catch up to Lyndon Johnson? Tell me how that works.
In earlier years, when Johnson actually, when he was a teacher in high school, Billy met him, and later on when Johnson became a member of the House of Representatives, they stayed in contact, and they had just an agreement between them, a handshake agreement that Lyndon would arrange for things to come Billy's way, and on the basis that Billy would give him a 10% in cash.
Okay.
And that lasted all the way up until he was vice president. And so they kept a close tie. And
was this 10% legal? Was it?
No, it was just a
Under the table type of
under
thing?
table cash kickback.
Okay.
And Johnson did that with almost everybody.
Okay.
Brown and Root, all the general contractors, all people, whatever Johnson headed their way, they just sent him 10%. That was just part of the agreement.
It was just how business was done back then.
That's and the handshake agreement, nothing in writing.
Okay.
But that's just the way it was done in those days. Still done that way today.
It is. Okay. So we have Billy Soul Estes that comes from the, let's say, the under the table money to Johnson, and was he also a good friend of him?
Yeah, they were very close friends. In fact, one morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang, and Billy was laying in bed, and he woke up, and he reached over and picked up the phone and says, hello, and Lyndon says, Billy, get a sack of money and get it out to the airport and put it on the airplane. I got a plane waiting on you, get it out there. And Billy Saul says, Lyndon, do you know what time it is? And Lyndon says, I don't give a GD what time it is. Get out to the airport with a sack of money. And he hung up.
And Billy Soul did that.
So he got a sack of money and took it to the airport.
You've been friends with Billy Soul for 18 years,
yes.
right? And so over the course of these 18 years, all these stories come out, just like any
That's right.
couple good friends talking all the time, and here's a little bit more each time you talk.
Well, it was just a casual conversation. I'd ask him a question, he'd answer it, and it's like we're talking about going fishing. But in this case, it'd be talking about a killing.
You also talked to another a lady, okay? And tell me not about her, but how did you meet her?
I was.
And what's her name?
Her name is Madeleine Duncan Brown.
Okay.
I was sitting at my computer at home and got a phone call from a lady named Joyce Isaac, who had a talk show in Austin. And she said, I just finished a great book titled Texas in the Morning by Madeleine Duncan Brown. I'm going to send you a copy of it. So she said, call me after you read it. So I read it and called her, and she said, well, if I can arrange an interview with Madeleine, would you come join us? I said, well, sure. So about a week later, she called and said, she's coming down, and would you go out to the airport and pick her up? And so I picked her up and went into KVET radio station and had a very good 1 hour talk with Joyce Isaac and Madeleine Brown and myself. And there was a real good friend of mine had a talk show on Austin cable TV. And he was on vacation, and so he asked me to fill in for him that night. And so I asked Joyce and Madeleine to join us. And so we went to the Austin cable TV and had another long discussion for about 2 hours.
Really?
And by the way, you can find that on YouTube.
That discussion?
Yes.
Is that the one you're sitting out in a pasture or a field somewhere?
No, that one was at my home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. At the ranch?
At the ranch, yeah.
Okay, cool.
And but every time I would go to Dallas, I'd call Madeleine. We'd have lunch or dinner, and she was living with Dr. Baker, Jerome Baker at that time, an old friend of hers.
Well, let's talk about, okay, now why is she important in this whole LBJ Kennedy thing?
Madeleine Brown was Lyndon Johnson's mistress for over 21 years and gave birth to his only known son,
Okay.
Stephen Brown. They called him Brown because they didn't want to have Johnson tied to him. After he grew up, he went to Texas A&M and got a degree, and then he went on to law school and passed the bar and became an attorney. And so by then Johnson had passed away, and so he told his mother that she finally told him who his father was. And so he said, I'm entitled to my share of the Johnson estate. And said, I'm going to sue the Johnson estate for $10.5 million. And his mother said, don't do that, son. They won't let you do that. And he says, Mother, I've got it's a slam dunk case. And so shortly after that, the Navy showed up, knocked at the door, and they arrested him for desertion from the Navy. And he actually had an honorable discharge. And the reason for abducting him was so he couldn't appear in court. So he didn't appear when it's time to have the hearing, and so
just got thrown out.
They threw it out.
Yeah. So you have Madeleine Brown that was a mistress to Lyndon Johnson, right? And so she must have heard. She must have been a part of, the whole, not the good old boy network, but she must have known what was going on there and the people involved. Did she know Billy Soule?
Madeleine and Billy were very close friends.
Okay.
Because he was one of the wheeler dealers, and because of her relationship to Johnson, she was always included in any major social event in the Dallas area. And anytime that Johnson came to Texas, they'd arrange for her to be there so that they could slip off in the evening.
The main event that your PowerPoint presentation and your videos with her talk about is a meeting that happened the night before Kennedy was shot. Tell us about that.
That's correct. On November the 21st, 1963, there was a social event at Clint Murchison's house off Preston Avenue in North Dallas. And there were 14 members of the press that were invited, and 26 members who were wheeler dealers or friends of the wheeler dealers were invited. And the Kennedy campaign plane landed in Fort Worth at 11:15 on the night of the 21st. Johnson immediately excused himself, and the Secret Service took him over to this Clint Murchison's house, and he arrived somewhere around about 12:30. And when he walked in the door, Clint Murchison stood up and says, "Okay, men, now we can have our meeting." So 26 men got up and went into the conference room and closed the door.
Give us some of the names of those people.
Well, it's at Clint Murchison's house, so he was there. H.L. Hunt was there. John Connolly was there. Richard Nixon.
Okay.
There were 3 members of the mafia.
Anybody that we'd recognize?
Carlos Marcello was head of the mafia in New Orleans. He was there, and Jack Ruby was there. He was a low-level mafia guy, and Joe Savello was head of the mafia in Dallas. He was there.
Okay.
And there were 2 law enforcement people there. There was Clint Peoples, who was a U.S. Marshal, and Dallas County Sheriff Bill Decker was there. And one of the killers the next day, Mac Wallace, was there.
Okay.
John J. McCloy was there, and he's very important in this because at that time he was chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank and chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay.
Former governor of Germany right after World War II. He negotiated the first contract with the OPEC countries and got them to agree to always trade their oil in dollars and to always deposit their profits in the top 3 banks in New York City. And not many people know that. But he was a very powerful person, and his point of being at the meeting is he was an agent of the Rothschilds, who were the top moguls of the international banking system. J. Edgar Hoover was there, and Clyde Tolson, his partner.
Okay.
And Billy Saul was there.
And so Madeleine Brown saw these people at this party.
Yeah, Madeleine was sitting at a table outside. She was not included in the meeting. There were 14 members of the press, and she was there with the press.
But she saw these people mingling around.
That's right, and she named all the people for me. Later on, and then she did a 90-minute on-video interview for me where she named all these people. Okay, well let's talk about the people that you recall were in that private meeting. Let's go over them one by one.
Okay.
Who do you recall were at this?
Of course, the ones that I remember the most were J. Edgar Hoover, McCloy, Hunt, H.L. Hunt, John Currington, that was always with Hunt, was there, and George Brown and Root. I'd have to look at a list. It's been so long ago.
Okay, here's a list. Do you want to go over that list to see if any of them ring a bell to you?
Well, let's see. I've already named Clint, Hunt, Lyndon came in, McCloy, Nixon, Amon Carter, of course George Brown, Earl Cabell, the mayor. I do not recall seeing R.L. Thornton, but he was usually there. B.R. Sheffield, John Conley was, where there was one of the Democrats, they usually were close by.
Right.
Clint Peoples, Bill Decker, the sheriff of, it's Dallas County. Cliff Carter was, I'd known Cliff. As a matter of fact, Cliff and Billy Saul were friends. And Billy Saul, Lyndon is one that introduced me to Billy Saul.
Yeah.
You told me we'd discuss these.
Yeah.
And Malcolm Wallace. Malcolm E. Wallace. I've known him since prior to the problems in Austin. And the Mafia, Carlos Marcello.
Marcellus?
Yeah, Marcellus, I think. And I always called him Joe Savella.
Uh-huh.
How do you pronounce it?
That's Joe Savello is the way I'd pronounce it.
Well, he was the head honcho in
Okay.
Dallas. Jack Ruby, yeah, he's my old buddy. I've known Jack a long time. And Larry Campbell. Okay.
Okay. Now let's go over these one by one and just tell me what you know about them.
You mean personally? though?
Personally. Clint Murkison, tell me what you know about Clint.
Well, Clint,
There's somebody else that was at that meeting that pretty much collaborated her story. Who was that?
Well, there's a Associated Press reporter named Lexdale Owens was there. And several years ago, I had placed my ranch up for sale, and a real estate person brought this fellow out, and I was giving him a tour of the house, and went into my shipping area, and he saw Madeleine's book on the shelf, Texas in the Morning, and he picked it up and looked at it a second and turned to me and says, "I was there." And I said, "You were where?" He said, "I was at the meeting." I said, "Yeah, but what meeting?" He said, "I was at the Clint Murkison meeting." So I grabbed his arm and we went in the living room and we had a long talk, and he verified the names of everybody that Billy Saul had told me about and that Madeleine had told me about. So I have 3 independent parties in separate meetings, 2 of them on video. Lexdale Owens couldn't do a video because of his contract with Associated Press wouldn't allow him to do that, but he did.
He collaborated everything.
That's
her
right.
story.
He corroborated every person that was there. And so my evidence is rock solid. Most of the people in the JFK investigation arena don't recognize the Clint Murkison meeting because I think because they're jealous that Madeleine never did tell them the story.
Okay.
I was the only one that she told the story to. And so if they weren't included, then they were saying, well, it didn't exist.
So why is that meeting important? What was said at the meeting?
The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the killing that was going to take place the next day.
So the final details, basically.
Cliff Carter was running the meeting. He was chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he was running the meeting, and he said, well, now, what about the evidence? And J. Edgar Hoover stood up. He says, all evidence must come through the FBI, and I've got that covered. So he sat back down, and so the meeting really didn't last very long. And so when it broke up, Johnson went out to the table where Madeleine was sitting and leaned over, and she thought he was going to say, well, I'll meet you at a certain hotel at a certain time, but what he actually says was, after tomorrow, that SOB Mick Kennedy will never embarrass me again. That's not a threat, that's a promise.
He said that?
He
Lyndon
said
Johnson?
That, he said that to Madeleine. And the next day, he called her by phone from Fort Worth and said exactly the same statement.
He did.
And so...
Did she know what that meant at the time?
She really didn't figure it out. She was really in love with Johnson and really couldn't imagine him being involved in something like that. She just sort of blanked her mind out to it. Wouldn't even think about it.
Okay.
And she really didn't ever talk about Johnson until he passed away.
Really? Okay.
Because she had loyalty to him. He was sort of the king of Texas.
Yes,
in
there
fact,
you go.
he was head of the Texas Mafia.
There you go.
And in fact, he had Mac Wallace kill 16 people in the state of Texas.
So we're going to talk about Mac Wallace in just a little bit, because I think, we're going to get into naming gunmen and all kinds of things. Well, I appreciate for the first episode. Thank you so much. And this has been The Converging Zone.